Hi class, in this video I'm going to go over how to sew your sleeves in using the flat technique and the inset technique. Now on this shirt I did the inset technique on this side and the flat technique on this side. You can't really tell by looking at it from the outside. So I'm going to flip this inside out. Now here at the top, no real difference. It's in the armpit that you can see a little bit of a difference. So on my left side here, you can see that I stitched the sleeve all the way around, and then I was able to sew it, the underarm seam, in one continuous stitch because my sleeve seam was already sewn. On this side, I sewed the underarm seam first of the sleeve and the shirt, and separately, and then was sewing it with the inset method, which means I put the sleeve inside the armhole and sewed it all the way around. So I have my sample here, and on one side I have already sewn the side seam of the shirt and the underarm seam and the hem of the sleeve. And the reason why I did the hem is that these sleeves are very tiny, and it is just easier if I do that beforehand. Now this one I did do it as a tube, but that meant I had to squeeze it into the machine and sew it just small amounts at a time, like this, versus just placing it into the machine and sewing it flat like this. Okay, so this is flat technique, so you can also do the hem flat. I could have done this hem flat and then sewn this seam, but then it doesn't look as good here. So you'll see that when I go to show you these. So sewing it together first, sewing the underarm seam first and then folding it in makes this edge look nice and clean, while doing it after you get this little bit of a fold here, which you then need to tack down in some way like this in order to make it look good, okay, and to stay flat, otherwise it sticks out when you're wearing your sleeve. Okay, so like I mentioned, this side will be my inset sleeve, and then this side will be my flat technique. So the flat technique sleeve, you literally flatten the shirt out. Now because I've already sewn the other side, it's a little bit more tricky, but I'm going to do my best. I'm just flattening out the arm's eye as much as I can all the way around. Okay. When you cut out your sleeves and your shirt pieces, make sure you put those notches are. Those notches are your indicators for the front and back of your sleeve. So one notch is the front, 2 notches is the back, and then you'll have a notch at the top or a circle that indicates your shoulder seam. Okay, so I have already made sure that my front will match my front and my back will match my back. So I have double notches here, single notches here, and I'll be placing them right sides together. So just double check that. You don't want to sew your left sleeve to your right side and vice versa. Now in this technique, I'm going to pin at the shoulder seam, pin on my front notch, and pin at my back notch, and also pin my corners. So you'll see that this is starting to curl, so go ahead and just pick that up and let it curl. And these points should all align from the corner to your first notch very smooth and evenly, because that's a perfect fit. It's here between that first notch, sometimes there's a circle on your pattern, and that shoulder seam that your sleeve is bigger than your arm's eye. And so why that is bigger is because we want to take a flat sleeve and we want to get it over the shoulder. And so to do that, we need to have a bigger piece that squeezes down and becomes smaller. And that squeezing down creates curvature, which then forms over your shoulder nicely. So your sleeve is normally big and like this, And then when you start to squeeze it, it crunches together and curves, which then fits over that arm's eye. Or sorry, over that shoulder in your arm's eye. So on a woven fabric, we gather this up. So we're really, the term that we should be using is easing. We aren't usually gathering. Gathering means that we have little wrinkles. Usually when we sew this, we don't want the wrinkles. So we ease it in by squishing the sleeve to fit into the arm's eye. And we do that by doing 2 rows of basting stitches, pulling those stitches and making it gather, but then we don't sew it gathered, we sew it with it eased in. So on a knit, however, we can stretch the arm's eye and make it fit. So I'm gently stretching my arm's eye here. And when I sew this, it will be eased into the arm's eye rather than gathered into the arm's eye. Okay, and I'm trying to pin this so that I will be sewing this with the larger piece on top, or sorry, underneath, touching the feed dogs, and that will, if it's touching the feed dogs will do the work for me, because the feed dogs always ease in the bottom layer just a tiny bit more than the top layer, unless you have a walking foot or a differential feed. So you can take advantage of that by putting the bigger piece on the feed dogs and letting it ease in. Keep your edges even. A shifting cut edge will create puckers and bubbles, because that means that this edges that are meant to be sewn exactly at your seam allowance will no longer be a perfect fit, and one side shifting may mean that it's too big and it won't fit. Okay, and then I'm going to pin to this corner. And so when I stitch this at the machine, I'm going to sew this, like I mentioned, with the sleeve down, making sure I keep my seam allowance precise and my cut edges aligned so that I will not get any ripples or bubbles. If you're unsure, baste it first. So here at the machine, I have it set up for a basting stitch, and I'm just going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just for the sake of the video, I don't want to take any time to have to fix anything. So I know that it's a basting stitch, but I do like to give myself 1 back stitch so that it doesn't come out. And I'm not going to take it out anyway. If you can stop with the needle down, I advise it. I know I'm sewing over the pins, but that's just because I don't want anything to shift on me, and I'm taking it slow. Just a gentle stretch the whole time, keeping it together. Okay, so now that I've basted it, I'm going to go back. Oh, I should check for puckers, but so rippled, but not puckered. Okay, I'm going to go back with my 3/8 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to go with something that is a finishing stitch. And again, I'm going to sew this with the sleeve touching the feed dogs. And this will sew just a little bit inside of what I just did, giving me a 3/8 inch seam allowance. As I'm sewing, I'm feeling under there, making sure that it's flat and pucker free. And anytime I'm adjusting the fabric, I make sure my needle's down. So that looks good on this side. Looks good on this side. And looks good on that side. And then that way I can match my hems together. And sew it I'm doing a lock stitch first. And if I want to make sure that this matches, I'm just going to insert a pin into the armpit here, aligning it on that point and that point so that it stays lined up when I go to stitch it. And I'm going to line up my hem corners and stitch that down. Generally, I like the seam allowance of my sleeve to be facing the sleeve, so I'm going to just flatten that out so I can go over it nicely. I waited to the very last second to take that pin out, so hopefully it will stay aligned. Okay, so I have sewn my sleeve in, I've sewn my side seam. Now, the last step, if you're going to do it this way, is to tack that sleeve down. I like to make my seam allowance go towards the back. So if my V-neck's here, my back's on the other side. So that means the seam allowance is going to fold to the back. And then I would tack that in place here. Now I did a bar tack last time. This time I think I'm just going to do a straight stitch. With my normal stitch length of 3. Okay. So I'm just going to do 3 stitches forward, and then 3 or 4 back, and 3 or 4 forward. Okay, and then that will deter this from popping up when it's worn. Okay, so that's how we do the flat technique. Now I'm going to show you how to pin it for the inset technique. Okay, so for the inset technique, so that's our flat technique, and you can see that it's all done. Looks nice, pucker free. Okay. For our inset technique, the first thing I like to do is match that armpit seam allowance. So I'm going to open this up. I'm going to push my side seam allowance to the back, and same thing on my sleeve. I want both of those to be going to the back, and I'm going to align that armpit seam allowance and those 2 edges together. Okay, and I'm going to place a pin in there, just like we did before, where we line it up here and line it up here, so that that seam will hopefully line up on the outside. Okay, then I like to pin it to my notches, matching my notches. And again, this should be a perfect fit. There shouldn't be any hidden ease or anything between the armpit and the notch on either side. Okay, once I get my armpit done and I've pinned to each notch, then I like to turn the garment inside out and go pin it the rest of the way from the inside. And that just helps make sure that you have it, 1, right sides together, and 2, you have the correct sleeve on the right side, so because you're matching those notches right away. Then I like to match that shoulder seam circle or notch, and again, the seam allowance at the shoulder should be going towards the back. So any seam allowance there goes towards the back of the shirt. And again, I want to pin it on the garment side because I'm going to be sewing this with the sleeve down, because again, the sleeve is bigger and we're making it go from flat to curved and big to small. So I'm gently stretching this. Again, sometimes you'll have circles as well to match. And often it'll say that on a woven sleeve, it'll say to put the gathering stitches to the circles, the small circles that are on the pattern. I actually like to go all the way to the notches, just giving myself just a little bit more to work with, because it's hard, especially if you're a beginner. So give yourself just a little bit more easing space. It does mean that you're distributing that ease just a little bit differently, and that could change how it hangs, but usually you can get away with it. So I'm just stretching the arm side just a little bit, and when this gets sewn together, it will be a perfect fit, and when it's washed, it should relax and go back to its normal state. Just don't overstretch. So I've pinned that all in, and now I'm ready to take this to the machine. This is trickier on this size of a pattern. So generally when we're working with small things, the flat technique is way easier to do than the set in method. So on your sample, this is just for your benefit. You don't have to turn this in for a grade. So it's just to teach you the 2 different methods and for you to practice before working on your final garment. We're back at the machine. So this is the tricky part, because I have to get this under here and make sure that I'm not accidentally sewing any of this part. So I need to just position all of this out of my way and make sure I only have what I'm sewing here. And it's tricky because I have pins everywhere and it's a small space. So again, I might just baste this. And because I'm going in a full circle, I'm not going to bother backstitching this time. that out. And so sometimes I use my seam ripper as a spare hand, spare finger. I can get closer and safer in there, and I can hold it down for longer. So you'll notice I'm only going a couple pins at a time, and then I have to correct it to make sure it's straight. And I'm feeling always that there's only what I want to sew underneath there. And then the shoulder seam, make sure it's going towards the back. Before you know it, you'll be back where you started. So now I'm going to I'm confident that that didn't pucker, so I'm just going to go ahead and switch to my other stitch. Let's do something different this time. Let's do this one. If it had puckered, I'd be able to feel it as I'm going around again too. So every time I run my finger down, I'm feeling to make sure it's flat. I just did a lock stitch. Okay, so that looks good. Trim your threads, turn it right side out. My match point was a little tiny bit off there, but it's an armpit. I'm going to let it go. And then you can see that it turned out well all the way around. Okay, so this is our finished shirt with an inset sleeve and a flat technique sleeve insertion. So pretty much looks exact same on the outside. Only difference is how it looks right here in the armpit. So this one has a separate stitch going around all the way around the sleeve, while this one has the side seam that goes up into the underarm seam. And then the two different ways that I did the hem, where I folded it in after I did the side seam, which gives us a nice clean look, just a little bit harder on small sleeves. And then when I did the hem before sewing that side seam, I then have to tack it down here. Okay, and that's it.